What keeps you awake at night?
Sea levels are rising globally.
Fears fueled by horror stories.
Among the worst flu season in a decade, and it hasn't peaked yet.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous.
Another series of deadly terror attacks.
Because you know that thing your brain does in the middle of the night? This crazy thing where it takes a small problem and it just makes it enormous?
What you're gonna do, I've made this salsa recipe many times now, and I've perfected it because I've thought to myself, this is an excellent way to integrate vitamins in a way that doesn't make me sad. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna take about 3 Roma tomatoes. You can take other tomatoes, totally up to you, totally your call. You take 3.
You used Roma, though.
I used Roma tomatoes. 3 to 4 Roma tomatoes, about a pound of tomatoes. And then you're gonna...
A pound of tomatoes?
Isn't that 3 or 4? Pretty sure that is.
I don't know how many a tomato is. Wow.
It's gonna be
Sorry,
3 or 4.
I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
Right. So then you're gonna want to take 2 to 3 jalapenos, whatever your preference. Now, I don't de-seed them personally. I think that part of the appeal of salsa is a little bit of heat. So you're gonna take the jalapenos. You're gonna take.
You know the heat isn't stored in the seeds, right?
No, but it's got chunks.
But the only part of the jalapeno that's spicy is the pith.
Well, I like the seeds. God forbid.
I like some texture. Jesus fucking
I'm pretty
Christ.
sure it is because capsaicin is oil, so it's going to be within the seeds, which contain oil.
I think it's in the pith. Keep going. We'll settle this later.
And so then you're going to take the jalapeno and you're going to take the tomato and you're going to put it right underneath the broiler of your oven. You're going to want to char that shit. Char is flavor, right? Then you're going to take that out of the broiler. You're going to put it in a blender. You're going to blend it with about 1/4 of an onion, preferably chopped ahead of time, as well as some pre-chopped garlic. I go personally with 3 cloves in this recipe. You blend it up. It's a little bit of salt and pepper. I put some cumin, some oregano, a little bit of chili powder, not too much, because if you heat chili powder, it gets a little bit of a bitter taste, right? You're going to take this mixture, you're going to put it in a pan, you're going to simmer it for, 30 minutes, get those flavors to meld. At the end, you can taste it. I usually splash a little bit of lime, some white vinegar, and you're going to have some of the best salsa you've ever had in your life.
You're like the Bob Ross of salsa. This is fantastic.
That is the biggest honor.
I'm right. The the heat comes from the pith. The seeds have spice on them because they come in contact with the pith, but there is no capsaicin in the seeds.
You're a coward.
No, I'm just right, Olivia.
I like the texture. So
no, that's fine. You can like your grainy ass salsa if you want.
Hi.
I've
never been so insulted. Here I am sitting on the show sharing my personal salsa recipe, and here you are insulting me for being honest. Forgot to chop some cilantro, add it fresh at the end. You don't want to cook that. You want it to be a fresh ingredient.
Unless you have the gene that makes cilantro taste like soap, in which case perhaps avoid it.
And just stop listening to the show, honestly.
Hey, welcome back to Things That Keep Me Up at Night.
Hello, I'm Olivia.
I am Brooke.
And our inconsistent opening that sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't happen.
It's a dice roll, really.
Yes.
So we haven't been announcing our episodes beforehand, so I guess this is just a surprise for everybody.
Yeah.
We're doing a documentary.
Woo! And I am furious.
Oh yeah, it isn't the worst documentary. Well, okay. It's the worst documentary we've seen in production. It's not the worst content.
God,
I think.
it was exhausting. I've never been
awful.
So tired it actually gave me a migraine. I had to take ibuprofen.
Did it really?
I had to take ibuprofen.
Holy
and Matt
shit.
had to massage the tension out of my neck.
Oh my god.
I was not having it.
And we talked about this documentary, right? When we were doing your episode, you mentioned
I
it.
hate it so much. I've been avoiding this documentary like the plague. It's called What the Health.
Woo!
And
yeah, where usually we do documentaries and we sort of review the content of the documentaries.
Cannot do it.
This time we're reviewing the quality of the documentary itself. So it's like a mashup between like our old horror movie reviews and then our real documentary episodes, because this time we're just going to be tearing this shit apart.
Oh my god. And like it's one of those things where we usually like review, we give you like a synopsis. We cannot do that this time.
No, it would be an hour long of just synopsis.
Holy
like we would have
shit.
to break it apart because there's so much in it. It's so dense.
So why don't we just start at the beginning and then just systematically go through our least favorite parts. Now,
yeah, I have
you have notes, which actually I find impressive because there's literally so much going on in this documentary that I gave up taking notes. I was like, it's too much. I cannot do it. It's someone reciting 16 facts a minute for 97 straight minutes. And you're just like...
It's like a book report.
Yeah. Like I said to Brooke, it's like when you're assigned a research paper in high school and you don't want to put in any original thought. So you just like kept copying and pasting citations from like other sources until your works cited for a high school research paper is like 6 pages. But like the actual paper is like 3. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your original content is like barely there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, Jesus, I don't even know the easiest way to handle it because there is so much. Like, he switches gears 4 or 5 times.
Oh my god.
And his central argument is always the same, but he never actually says it out loud. The argument of this documentary is you should be vegan. Like, that is the core message.
Yeah.
That's what it is. He wants to disguise it. Kip Anderson, by the way, is the guy who made this
I don't like that man.
pile of garbage.
Yeah.
But his core message is you should be vegan, but he kind of dances around it by pretending that, like, he is trying to prove that, I don't know, certain meats aren't unhealthy. Like, he tries to convince the audience several times that he's not a vegan or he didn't start as one when the documentary was made, which is just clearly untrue.
Yeah, because his previous film, 2014, was Cowspiracy, another documentary on why you should stop eating meat.
Right. So, sorry? No.
Yeah, he opens up the movie with like this preface that he's very concerned about his health. He has health problems run in his family. He's seen, family members get cancer, get heart disease, diabetes, which like I can relate to because big mood.
Yeah.
And then he says, and as a result, I was a hypochondriac. I would frequent WebMD for every answer, but then proceeds to talk about his entire movie. And like, I understand he was trying to give a little personal information on him, but he kind of devalued the entire movie because it's like, I'm a hypochondriac, but this time I'm right. This time.
Yeah, you should believe it this time.
Yeah.
And, like, that's not intentional at all.
No.
But in one swift movement, he completely discredits his entire point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
So he starts by addressing kind of meat, I guess, and its role in cancer risk and also diabetes risk and heart disease risk. And the first thing he does is sort of attribute meat to a higher cancer risk by citing the WHO in this report that said that meats were, or rather processed meats, were class 1 carcinogens in the same category as asbestos and cigarettes.
And plutonium,
And plutonium.
God. And I would like to fucking talk about this part. Now, there's a lot of stuff okay, so I'm also going to qualify. We're going to kind of, sort of discuss some debunking, but that is not going to be the center of this because we literally do not have the time to go into that. Just Google, like, this movie debunked because we just don't have the time.
There's an awesome article on Vox that sort of breaks it down a little bit, but there's so much more that they don't touch on that's just like... And that's the worst part about this whole thing is that I don't want to start out by saying that everything this guy points out is wrong, because he does actually have some valid points that he's trying to make. The issue is that first of all, he's just not very smart about the way he presents his points. And also, he just completely misrepresents the science and, like, purposefully cherry picks his information in such a way that it undermines everything he's trying to say. So most of what this is going to be is us breaking apart what a bad documentary it is, because we just don't have the time to get into the factual stuff.
No.
But yeah, he makes claims about, like, it's all just fear-mongering. He makes claims about Medicare that I thought was just bizarre. He says that 1 in 3 Medicare and 1 in 10 healthcare dollars spent are on people with diabetes. But, like, yeah, of course it is, because the price of insulin has skyrocketed faster than housing, hospitals, and gold combined. Like,
which also is wild to me because it's gotten continuously easier and easier and easier and easier to produce and refine insulin. I could do it right now in a lab. Like, no joke.
Yeah, but, like, pharmaceuticals.
Yeah,
so, like,
which is a whole nether.
That's fucking why.
Yeah, and like he flicking. Okay, so let's, for the sake of ease, we'll break it into 4 chunks. We'll talk about the physical health health negatives. I think then he goes into the environment. Then he talks about institutional racism, which you might be shocked to hear it goes there, but it does.
Yeah, not for very long, but it definitely touches on it for the sake of its own point.
And I think just like the last one is probably the political scheming at the end. Is probably,
yes.
And now this all again is very mushed. I am manually segmenting it for you.
No, yeah, that's the easiest way to chunk it, I think.
Yeah.
It's bad. It's poorly organized, to say the least.
Yeah. So this first part, the health part, like, again, please just Google, like, this debunked, because there are journalists that have put hours and hours and hours more effort than we have, like, going through every single minute of this film. You said Vox had a good one. I agree. We both read that one. So, like, the little things that I'll discuss that really bother me, because I have done, like, research in pharmaceutical applications, is, like, the class system for carcinogens is so wildly misunderstood. Like, yes, plutonium, clear cut, is a carcinogen. Yes, cigarettes, clear cut, are a carcinogen. But if you walk through a room of, like, reactive plutonium, I don't think you're going to make it out the other side. If you walk through a room with cigarette smoke, you'll probably be fine. And if you walk through a room and, like, just have, like, a smidge of bacon, you will feel nothing. Like, it's all relative to how much you're consuming, right? Like, lethal dose is so relative. So, like, and I focus on this because he repeats the class 1 carcinogen thing no less than 50 times throughout this entire documentary.
And just in the first third, like, he drops that pretty quick to, like, go on to other things.
Yeah.
But in that first third, oh my god.
And it's like, it'd be like,
it's everywhere.
And it's so forced. It's like, he 3 different instances, he calls 3 different agencies, and is like, why have you listed meat on your, like, healthy diet plan things,
God.
which was the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, I think.
Yeah, and the American Cancer Association.
And the American Cancer Society. And,
yeah, that's it.
and he gets connected to the secretary. And he and I'm
it's
gonna
a fucking phone call representative. Are you joking?
And these are like almost the exact words. Hi, I'm just calling because I have a question. On your website, you've listed meat and refined meats as healthy foods in a healthy diet, and these meats are also known as class 1 carcinogens as listed by the World Health Organization. And I'm just, like, wondering why they're listed on your website. And secretaries.
No shit. He goes, wouldn't this be exactly the same as the American Lung Association listing cigarettes as part of a healthy lifestyle?
And the secretary is like,
woman, I can't answer that. I have no
Sir,
control
what
over
department do you
this.
want me to connect you to?
Right?
I've been in enough customer service to know I would not know how to manage that situation.
Right? Because it's not her job. And he does this like 4 times with different associations. Susan B. Komen also, he calls them about milk
not
products.
only calls them, they're at
He
the
shows
end.
up at their door.
Yeah, he walks into these foundations and it does these like quick cuts of him walking in through security into their offices, and like every time the secretaries are like, you can't be here, and he's like, I was unable to get answers, and I'm like,
This is my least favorite thing about him as a person is he tries to like disguise everything as gotcha journalism where like he walks, or rather when he calls, you know, these poor people are like, I can't answer your question. Who do you want to get in contact with? And then it cuts the audio and he goes, yet again, another person who couldn't answer my questions.
and it was so
It's like,
funny.
yeah, of course they can't.
Deborah
It's
just
not
got
their
hired
job.
here. Oh my god. And like,
Can you imagine?
and my
No.
other thing is like, and this is, you know, from somebody who's been working in science for a while, you're pretty much consulted at all times to not speak with anyone unless you've given express permission to talk to them. Just because like you're representing a company and an image, and like I completely get it. So if some rando is like, can I get a statement on the link between diet and diabetes, you've probably been told that you're going to get phone calls like these before, because I don't doubt that they do. And they're just told, refer them to someone else. You're not a spokesperson for the company. Because like if you're talking to like one scientist that's like, dude, I'm just pouring cell plates. Like, I'll be honest with you. I can't speak on that. And then he's like, why are you refusing to give comment? I'm like, nobody has any power in these companies, dude. Like, literally.
And it reads like a satire.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane.
Ugh.
He thinks he's like uncovering a conspiracy, and really it's just he's talking to the wrong people.
So, like, that, like, dominates the first quarter of like the topics of like the trying to like get you gotcha health stuff is like just this presentation of the lack of information. And then about the other, I'm going to say about half is the presence of no information. And then the other half is talking to doctors who which made Brooke so unbelievably mad, and you can take the lead with this one.
Oh my God. So I took the time because I was interested in looking up every single one of the doctors he talks to. And eventually I had to drop off because I got to like 8.
And that was enough.
Yeah, that was enough because each time I did it, I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. And so I just kind of assumed that the rest are also like this.
Yeah.
So the first one is from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. It was actually the founder. This is a well-known organization of people promoting veganism, not overall health. It has ties to organizations that are known domestic terrorists.
Oh!
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. Barnard. So that's his whole thing. Definitely no agenda there.
Nope.
Caldwell Esselstyn, he hawks his own artery recovery plan by putting people on a plant-based and oil-free diet for a non-insurance covered fee of $1,200. So that's fine, I'm sure.
Oh, I love that.
Michael Greger, he's known for overstating the dangers of meat-inclusive diets and ignoring scientific data that contradicts his own claims, and that's via other scientists that he's worked with. There's an oncologist named David Gorski who has talked about this other guy that they had on. His name is Dr. Klaper. And it says, quote, and I wrote this down verbatim because I thought it was so crazy. Dr. Klaper, quote, subscribes to the all-too-common claim that a vegan diet is better than any other and supplements that claim with the belief that undergoing fasts, in which one consumes only water, is a major part of the path to health and wellness. He supports multiple pseudoscience medical claims such as acupuncture, chiropractic, naturopathy, and borderline, quote, germ theory denialism. Klaper also gives, quote, highly dubious advice for cancer patients, even claiming that fasting can shrink malignant tumors.
Nope.
Claper claims that fasts will clear up inflammation, eczema, arthritis, and other issues. The Dr. Gorski who talked about this says the situation is way more complicated than Dr. Claper paints it, and as a surgeon himself, Gorski is appalled that Claper claims that fasting encourages faster wound healing, a statement that Gorski calls, and I quote, bullshit.
Excellent.
So that's cool. And then there's True North Health Center, which I think is one of like the biggest key players in this.
Yeah.
Because they've got a couple of people that they bring in like kind of off the street, like, this is my life and I'm so sick. And then they go to True North and then they're like healed forever.
We can fucking unpack that in a minute. That's my least favorite part. Continue.
Right. So True North, they actually brought in the founder of True North as well. He is a health center that touts water fasting as a cure-all for high blood pressure, cholesterol, cancer, and so many other things I didn't bother to write them down.
Oh my god.
Sorry, Alan Goldhamer. Breatharianism doesn't fucking work!
Anger.
It's insane!
Right.
Also, John McDougall is an animal rights activist and claims that diet can reverse cancer and diabetes. Fucker. And I think that's where I just stopped.
Yeah, that's
because
enough.
It's like,
that's
enough.
representative.
And also, every single one of the people that he brought on his documentary
have to have lied. No.
Why?
Okay, the doctors were dishonest in selling something. All of them had books.
They all had a book. Every single one.
Yeah. The people, the case studies, this made me so viscerally upset. There were 3 case studies of people they were trying this quote-unquote vegan diet out. Ugh. First of all, this is like an aside for me, like a confirmation that this had to have been staged. He is the worst actor on the face of the planet.
He's amazing.
I'm gonna do like an exact thing. He's like, so would you say that eating meat is healthy? And when you film a point perspective like shot, you have to get the person to talk to you as you stand next to the camera, so they're not standing directly towards the camera, they're standing at you, but you're not supposed to be in the shot. So he would like ask them a question and then just be in the shot while they answered, and just
standing awkwardly with his hands folded.
He looks like,
it's insane.
I asked Brooke, I said, is this an alien pretending to be a human? Because he would like ask and then just like stand in the most uncomfortable way.
He would like look at the floor, but like slightly forward, so it looked like his face was just completely blank. It was fantastic.
So like,
and there's another part like earlier in the documentary where he's like making these phone calls, and he claims that he got an interview with like the American Cancer Society or something. I don't remember which one of the associations he got an interview with, but he like all of a sudden, for the first time, I think, it's like this jarring cut to him sitting on a couch, and he like flips his phone around, which is off, and he goes, oh, hey, I just got an interview with the American Cancer Society. And then it cuts again to him walking on the street, and he goes, so I went to the American Cancer Society, and I was told that I couldn't be seen because of the nature of the information I was asking about. It's so interesting because I'm just asking about diet and health.
Which, like, it's like the rest of his behavior throughout the documentary is so indicative that he's not, quote-unquote, just asking about diet and health, and he's clearly so obnoxious. But, like...
Also, we never see the email he's talking about. He just, like, claims that he got an email canceling this interview that we never see get set up. Yeah. And I'm like, there's no fucking way you were given an interview. There's no way
in the fucking world. Yeah, especially if he's already made Cowspiracy, they know who this man is. And so...
Right, come on.
So the reason why I bring up his presentation is because when they bring up these case studies, it is so... like clearly spoon-fed. Like he would say, so you've noticed an improvement in your health? Swear to God, that's the delivery. And they'd be like, yes. Now, I would like to talk about these 3 case studies because I am beyond appalled that these people are put in this documentary. First, do you know any of their names?
I don't. I didn't write them down.
I have nicknames for them. First Lady, Asthma Lady. asthma lady claims that she had chronic asthma where she like couldn't breathe, like she'd sit on the couch and she'd not be able to breathe, which okay. And then
she was using like a CPAP during the day.
Yeah. And so she went to the doctor. The doctor tested her using some heart ranking scale, which I'm not familiar with. I'm not a med student. I'm not a doctor. But she said that 3 would be indicative that she is at risk for a heart attack, and she got like 10.3. Now, whether or not that's true, who knows? But she said that her doctor told her, you're going to have a heart attack in 30 days. And they said that, and she went, well, you know, if I continued the way that I was living, which seems like a backtrack, but also there is literally no fucking way that I would ever believe that a doctor would tell their patient to their face, you will have a heart attack in 30 days. I refuse to believe that.
I don't think there is a diagnostic that allows for doctors to tell you the date of when you're gonna have a heart attack.
No!
Like, now that I'm thinking about it, that's actually fucking insane.
No!
So she claims that there's this scale that, like, you take a test and then it measures on a scale of 1 to 3?
Yeah.
Of, like, your likelihood of having a cardiac event.
3
1 being
likely.
low. You're 3 likely. And then she said that she got a 10, and I'm like, how the fuck do you get a 10?
Right?
It's on a scale of 1 to 3. What's the point of the scale, doctor?
Yeah, I don't. So, like, that was
What is
bizarre.
that?
And so I'll just go like by each person. Later in the documentary, she says that after 2 weeks that she was capable of going off blood pressure medication. It was blood pressure medication, antidepressants, which I'm less inclined to believe because those have a taper off period, generally speaking, of 2 to 8 weeks. So I don't know why a fast would change that. She's claimed that she was no longer taking Oxy, which Oxy withdrawals
which is crazy.
would take 3 days to kick in. So if she was either taking Oxy, like, she would be having gnarly withdrawals. But if she wasn't, because they never show you the names on the vials, they just show you the drugs. If she wasn't taking Oxy, then yeah, you're not going to fucking notice anything. There's a reason we have an OxyContin epidemic. You can't just like stop taking it. Her asthma medication, like a ton of other stuff, she said she just stopped taking it after 2 weeks, which is just like, I refuse to believe it. Like, it just doesn't make sense physiologically. Now, that was one. Next is Bone Lady. Bone Lady is presented in, she's like 63, using a walker in order to get around because her osteoporosis is like that bad. Now, this could just be me, and you can tell me if I'm being a bitch. The presentation seemed over the top. Am I wrong?
So I didn't think so until later.
Okay, maybe it's because I'm looking back in hindsight. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So what they first present us with is this woman who can barely move around her home, and she, like, herself says that she was basically couch-ridden for years because she had to take all these medications, and she could only use a walker to get around. She couldn't leave her house, and she was just in constant pain all the time.
Yeah.
And then later, like, an hour later, they bring her back and claim that after 2 weeks of being on a vegan diet,
she can walk again.
Normally, without a walker, outside alone.
Which is physiologically impossible because it takes months to regrow bone. It takes months to regrow bone, and if she's having like osteoporosis and joint issues, it will take a very long time for her joints to recover. So first of all, I don't believe it. But like, I looked back later and I paused it because I thought that I had seen it wrong. She also said she was taking antidepressants, like meds for her bones, meds for the pain. I don't remember if she said she was taking
and
Oxy.
Also meds to mitigate. Yeah, she said she was taking meds to mitigate the meds that she was taking for her health.
Which,
like, is crazy.
Yeah. And if
you had that severe of side effects to the medication that you were prescribed, you would be taken off of them.
Yeah, there's so many, like, as somebody who's been through literally every psychiatric medicine that exists, there's very few meds on the face of the planet where they're like, nope, this is it. This is all we have.
That's all you got.
And like, unless it was like a dry mouth medication, like, which I feel like is such an over-presentation of the side effects you're having, whatever. And if you go back to the later half of the documentary where she's showing her meds, and it goes back to her like sitting on the couch with the meds, there are just purchase containers of vitamins and medicine.
I didn't notice that.
I didn't notice that
sounds
until,
about
like,
right.
the end, where I was like, did they... Because you can't prove to me, like, just take it out of the box. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, how low budget is this documentary where they're like, we need to make sure we can return it after this shot?
Jesus Christ.
And so
Oh
my other issue with this is the asthma woman, like, she was clearly, like, obese, and she said outright that she did not take care of herself. The problem I had with Bone Lady is she didn't indicate anything that she had done to result in that position. And the reason why I have that complaint is they have one more dude who, like, again, is outwardly open that he didn't take care of himself, right?
Right.
So why, like, what did she do to have severe, like, osteoporosis to the point where she can't walk anymore? Like,
Well, I mean, most likely she wasn't getting her nutrients, but also it could be genetic.
could be, I suppose. Yeah, there was one dude, he was like barely in the documentary. He was just like, I don't eat well and I'm taking meds for my blood pressure. And I'm like,
Yeah. Oh, the guy with diabetes?
yeah, that was it. He was taking
Yeah.
diabetes and he was taking blood pressure stuff. He was actually the only one who I believed, funny enough.
I don't know. Like, as someone with a brother with diabetes, and granted, my brother has type 1 diabetes.
Yep.
Like, the way that diabetes was characterized was like this horror show.
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, yeah, if you eat like shit and like don't watch your blood sugar, sure.
Yeah.
But like, and he made this claim. He's like, after eating vegan, I cut my insulin intake in half. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you're not eating as much sugar.
Yeah.
Which would have happened anyway. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, that's not a crazy thing to say. Like, it's not crazy that he cut his insulin intake in half if he was really, truly eating that
It
poorly.
also makes me so nervous. Now, the reason why this was my least favorite part of the documentary, made me so mad, is
Right.
I'm going to say personally, I didn't really believe any of them. Just me speaking.
Sure.
Their claims seemed fallacious, and it just, like, the results, if they were not lying initially, do not make physiological sense. However, I don't believe them.
But we're not doctors and we have no proof, so don't sue us?
So don't sue us. I'm just saying I don't buy it. This is so wildly dangerous to people that are actually taking medications that they need to take. Like, just to say,
Oh, yeah. By the way, don't ever just go off meds
No.
because you feel better.
No.
Go, like, talk to your goddamn doctor. Like,
can you imagine, like, these people are taking heart medication that is literally keeping them alive, and they're like, I'm
Right?
feeling better, so I'm just gonna go off my heart medication.
stop taking hypertension meds. What?
Like,
Don't do that.
yeah, and I don't know if that
And
was through
that-
the advisory of the people at that clinic.
don't
I
know.
suppose it is.
Yeah.
But it is so ethically, like, bankrupt to just fucking say, oh yeah, I went off my meds, go vegan and consider it. Like, that's my dad keeps what's it called? It's the explosive that they use in TNT. Nitroglycerin is
Yeah.
also a heart med, like an emergency
Yeah.
heart med if you have a heart attack. He has to
Right.
keep it on a chain on him at all times because he had heart surgery, right?
Jesus.
God, I can't. If I went home and my father said, I just started eating vegan and I stopped taking my heart meds, I would lose my fucking mind. Like, I would
Right,
lose my
yeah.
mind because that is so not safe.
And that, I think, is one of the biggest crimes of this documentary is, like, yeah, okay, the pharmaceutical industry has, like, crazy pull in politics and is highly...
Did you say
just
crazy Poland politics?
pull in politics?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, weird, way to bring Poland into this, but I'm
Yeah,
behind
that's
it.
bizarre. You were just ready to believe me. But, like, yeah, the pharmaceutical industry is morally corrupt in every way and, like,
100%.
whatever.
Yeah.
But the documentary tried to make this claim that doctors prescribe medication to keep you sick, which is, like, such a bizarre take because there's no evidence.
Yeah.
And also, that's highly dangerous for
Yeah.
anyone watching who believes you.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, if I'm on medication for hypertension and I just stop and I die, that's on you. What?
Yeah, pretty much.
Crazy town.
And this
also
this was like my issue with this is like with the first and third people, right? They admitted they weren't taking care of themselves, and that's why they were overweight and were diabetic or had heart issues or whatever. And I texted you like my issue with this documentary was like, patient doesn't take care of themselves, doesn't exercise, doesn't walk, doesn't listen to doctor's advice, eats horribly. Doctor, you're going to have to go on heart meds or you're going to die. Patient, my doctor just wants to push meds on me. I'm
right?
You can't get to the end point and be like, I don't understand how I got here. Like, I had to adjust my diet for my acid reflux. I take responsibility for that. And we'll get into some of the socioeconomic stuff because there's like 100% that factor and genetics. But like, there's definitely, I feel, a little bit of blame displacement in this documentary of like...
It's so weird because the documentary both blames doctors and modern medicine and also blames you.
Yeah!
And it's like, I mean, pick your poison, I guess, but you can't have it both ways. Like, it's either the medical industry's fault or it's my fault in particular, but you can't have both.
I don't want it to be my fault. I want it to be their fault, but I also want to know.
It's just so crazy to me that they just make these outlandish claims, and the doctors themselves, like, I feel shouldn't be practicing medicine, because like one of them we talked about
my
this
least favorite
the guy who was like, you know, I never see anybody with a protein deficiency. It just doesn't happen. You never see that.
I had a protein deficiency. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Anemia
exists.
It's so common. I had it. What?
Yeah, that was bizarre.
And it's like, this guy is like a weight loss specialist, and like you said, you're like, yeah, of course you don't see fucking protein deficiency in your line of work.
Yeah, you're seeing people that are like overeating meat. What the fuck?
It's crazy. And like, okay, and that's something else I want to address. I don't want it to sound like I think that eating more vegetables and fruits is wrong.
No.
Like, there isn't really any contention for the idea that a more heavily plant-based diet is better for you than eating meat all the goddamn time.
Yeah.
But like, what I think is just so heinous is the idea that like, you have to lie to get your point across, I guess. They're claiming that eating one egg is the same as smoking 5 cigarettes, which is just an insane equivalence.
That's not correct.
No, it isn't. It's like this antiquated idea of what cholesterol is, first of all.
Yeah.
Like, they're using the 1950s idea of what cholesterol is. It's crazy.
Yeah. Also, you talked about their argument was your body does not process fat and can only turn fat into into fat, which is like has been debunked for the past 25 to 30 years.
This was insane. Yeah, one of the in fact, several of the doctors said that if you eat carbs won't make you fat. And I was like, I'm sorry. No? That's not true at all. And they're like, well, carbs can only be stored. It's either burned or it's stored as glycogen and it doesn't convert to fat. And I'm like, you're a goddamn liar. Like, you don't understand science, I guess, because no. Like, for years, decades, we've known that, like, eating a high-fat diet does not necessarily, like, in fact, most of the time does not mean that you will be fat. Right? Like, it doesn't convert to body fat.
No, it's like, the excess of calories it switches your body's we don't have to. What I'm saying is it doesn't. No,
it's wrong. It is incorrect to say that if you eat only carbs that you won't get fat. That's insane.
Which also, if anybody's curious on what their argument was for diabetes, their argument, no fucking around here, was if you eat saturated fats, it will immediately coat all of your arteries and digestion system so that
blood cells.
When your body releases insulin, it will not be able to be reabsorbed and you have an insulin resistance.
That was it, yeah.
And I'm first of all, I understand the biological process for releasing insulin. I took an introductory anatomy course this summer, and I can tell you that that's not fucking true. What happens is if you have an excess of glucose in your blood and your body is constantly releasing insulin, your body adapts to having too much insulin released and stops releasing as much insulin over the course of time, leading to type 2 diabetes, unless you're type 1 diabetic, which means you have an issue releasing insulin from the get-go. But it's
right, your pancreas doesn't work.
It's triggered by the presence of glucose in your blood. That is the signaling molecule in your liver and pancreas. Well, in your...
Right.
Yeah.
And their argument was, you can't get diabetes by eating too much sugar. And I'm like, are you joking my ass? That's just incorrect. Like... So, yeah.
So we're losing our minds here.
Right. And this is like just the tip of the iceberg, because they just make all of these claims in passing, and I have to like pause it and just double, triple take.
Yeah.
Like
that's what I said. We don't have the time to unpack all of their points, because just when you just heard them say you can't get diabetes from eating sugar, and you're like, well wait a gosh darn minute, they've already switched to another fallacious claim that eating meat over time will make your body digest its own pancreas, and then you're like,
oh my
well,
God.
hold on 1 second, and they're like, and now to talk about cows, and I'm like,
no, go back to the other thing. I'm not finished with you.
Like, it's just too much. It was so much.
It was like all of a sudden they were talking about diabetes in children, and they were like, you know, if you keep feeding your kids meat, they're going to get diabetes. And I'm like, are we just not going to talk about the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Like, because they're like, it's your fault as a parent if your child gets diabetes. And it's like, holy shit, what? No, it's not.
What the fuck? Holy shit.
No, ma'am, it's not.
Oh my God.
I'm so distressed that I'm bringing back the happening.
That's the only way I can fucking handle this right now. And so
it's crazy.
Oh my God. And we don't even have just my favorite comment was, he asks one of the doctors, is it healthier to eat red meat or chicken? And objectively, if you have issues with your heart, it is always recommended 10 out of 10 that white meat chicken is far better for you. It's in like every diet plan my father has. It's well documented and well known due to the high ratio of saturated fat.
Right.
He goes, well, the question is essentially, would you rather die by being shot or hung? And I'm like, that is
no, it isn't.
So fucking orthorexic. That's the most orthorexic shit I've heard thus far. I was soon proven wrong. But, God, that...
Like, that's such a crazy answer for a doctor to give.
A doctor
who
gave
holds an
that
MD.
response.
And then never answered the question. Like, the question was, which is healthier? Objectively speaking, poultry is always, like, because of the saturated fat level, just healthier for your heart.
Yeah. It's
but,
the lower
he didn't
everything.
answer the question. He just, like, that is the most propaganda-filled answer. And that's like
so
all of
toxic.
this fucking documentary. Like,
that's
the
like a whole
visuals
thing
that they give. Oh my God, the visuals.
That was
they
my
give when they're
favorite.
talking.
I wrote that down. My favorite
Did
part,
you?
his editing. He would edit the most bizarre B-roll in the world.
The fucking skits.
Where, like,
oh my God.
they would give kids like hot dog buns with cigars in it, or they would have
Which
a
are
mom.
clearly CGI because they can't do that.
And then, like, they'd have a mom cooking their kid. I don't know what she was cooking. Something with meat, and
Like
there were
sausages,
Yeah,
I think?
and there were cigarettes in the pan with the sausages, and I'm just like, what the fuck is happening?
Like, do people fall for this?
There was like one random B-roll where they just like put a fish in a blender for some reason.
Yeah, what is this? Okay, this argument, I want to like break it down really quick.
Are we talking about the
because, like,
mercury sponges?
No, the fish in the blender, I want to like break it. So that, I remember why they did that.
I don't remember at
Because
all.
they were
It's all a
talking
blur.
about like how humans are not supposed to eat meat, that we're not true omnivores, that we're like frugivores, I guess.
Yeah.
Because our closest living relatives are chimpanzees. Whatever. You know what? I don't even want to like argue that because, first of all,
I don't
I'm not an
know.
evolutionary scientist and
Yeah.
I have no goddamn idea. Maybe we're not meant to eat meat. We've been doing it for centuries, but whatever. But, like, my point is that their proof for why we aren't meant to eat meat the way that true omnivores are is that, first of all, we don't look like bears. Okay.
No. I just want to clarify. That is their argument. Brooke
That
is
is their
not
argument.
exaggerating.
We don't look like bears is one of them. And then the other one is, well, I mean, anybody would want to drink a smoothie if you put fruit and veggies in a blender. But if you put a raw steak or a raw fish in a blender, that's disgusting.
Of course it is, you fucking maniac!
What? That's nothing.
Oh my god.
What is that? That's not science.
I cannot get over the bear thing. They were like, if we were meant to eat meat, we would look more like bears. And I'm like,
Which, like, there is something to be said about, like, just the physiology of teeth and whatever. But the way they said it is just so... we would look like bears, and then they have, like, a human slowly morph into a bear. And it's like, who made this? This is awful. It's so stupid. And then later there's this amazing B-roll where it's the first time it's a skit.
oh yeah.
And, like,
it's so jarring that it
It's
exists.
so bizarre. So they're talking about, like...
The McDonald's
fast
Corporation,
food, yeah,
like,
they're talking
designing
about fast
a menu.
Food companies, right? And how they like want to, they get government subsidies for like certain foods and whatever. It's all very difficult to understand.
We'll get to
because
that
they're
when we
not
get
very
to that
good.
topic, but
Right, but this skit is like all of these people in a marketing boardroom, and one of them goes, double sausage egg McMuffin with cheese and extra egg on the side
and bacon, and they pause and they're like,
with extra cheese,
and they're like,
and everybody
"Yes."
goes, ah!
Which honestly, I've seen what Taco Bell produces and what KFC produces,
Fair
and
enough,
like,
man.
that's not too far off
Yeah,
from the truth.
it's pretty close.
Yeah, so
Doritos taco. Oh boy.
or what was it? They put Cheetos on fried chicken.
Stop it.
That was KFC. Yeah, they put.
I don't want to think about it.
All right, fair enough. So anyway,
But your favorite? What's your favorite B-roll?
my
Olivia?
favorite B-roll is like, okay, so now I feel like is an appropriate time to transition into the environmental aspect of it. So they talk about and I'll touch on it when we get to it because it's one of my favorite segments. They essentially talk about bioaccumulation of pesticides and mercury and toxins. Toxins, I say lightly. I hate that word with every cell of my entire being.
Oh my god, yeah, there's one of the doctors uses the phrase, I wrote it down in all caps, dead meat bacteria toxins.
Oh my god, that's good. That brings life
I had
back
to
into
interrupt
me.
you.
No,
Go
that
ahead.
was perfect. So one doctor calls fish mercury sponges, which is not correct. And they talk about, you know, the fish industry and the difference between farming and fresh caught. And like there were some points in there that were get obscured with, what was the exact phrase? Can you repeat it to me again?
Oh, I don't even know.
No, dead
What?
fish bacteria toxins.
Oh, dead fish bacteria
There
toxins.
it is, thank
yeah.
you. And so they talk about one thing, and oh Christ, I can't even remember the name of the chemical because my body is so forcibly trying to get every information.
Are you talking about dioxins?
Yeah, dioxins. They were talking about dioxins, and they did this like really like uncomfortable animation of dioxins going in the air, and they were like, if you drove through dioxins, you wouldn't immediately die, but then it gets in the plants and the soil, and then the cows eat the toxins, and then you take the cows, and then you eat the cows, and they have a higher amount of dioxins, and then it zooms into a home with a pregnant woman drinking a glass of milk with cheese and like a turkey leg. That is my favorite animation because then it immediately transitions to talking about women eating meat and dairy products while pregnant, which they cover for maybe at max 5 minutes before he jumps back to the environment. And it's like, oh my God, I want to get off the ride.
Let me out. I want to go home.
Which I think my favorite quote from that section is he said, I was surprised to find that the meat industry... Do you love my voice for him?
I love
But
We both have our own take on it.
Is it wrong? That sounds
No, it's perfect.
Yeah. It's like, I was surprised to find that the meat industry had an effect on the environment too, and I'm sorry, but that is one of the most selfish comments that he's made in this entire fucking film.
Yeah, are you asleep all the time? Like, come on.
Like, you made this movie
I think I learned
after
about
Food
like
Inc.
greenhouse gases as a result of like agriculture when I was 12.
Yeah, so fucking wake up, okay?
Get woke, Kip.
Ugh, Jesus. And like, that's the thing is Matt, without even looking away from his computer monitor as this is playing in the room that he's in, goes, you know, what's unfortunate is there's actually a lot of good points in there that he's too stupid to realize. And like, he's not wrong. Like, yes, there is a concern with, pollution and waste runoff that causes algae blooms, and, industrial farming has a huge drain on the surrounding environments and the people that live there and the animals that are involved in it. Yes, but when you fucking jump cut this information with somebody who goes dead meat bacterial toxins, it just diminishes the whole fucking thing.
Yeah, and then they go into sort of the socioeconomic,
which will transition
not even that,
to in a
yeah, and like they just don't pay it enough mind, right? Like if you're gonna make an argument that like systemic racism is at play in the agriculture industry, you're gonna have to like do more than 10 minutes of legwork, and they just don't.
It's a whole documentary. Like all 4 of these portions could have been their own documentaries, but like the absolute fucking abysmal time they spent on like, agricultural racism and like nutritional racism just blew my fucking mind.
Right.
So that section was essentially talking about that, generally speaking, poor populations of people are living by agricultural areas, specifically like near hog farms, near dairy producers, this, that, and the other. That's a fact. That is like, it's an outright fact. They don't really, legislators don't really put a ton of time and effort into regulating those things to protect the people around it, because quite frankly, they don't care. Something they don't talk about in the movie that I'm aware of, because I was an ex-agricultural engineer, is legislation made on farmers to, quote-unquote, improve the environment, improve housing conditions, this, that, and the other, actually takes a massive toll on the farmers, because there's this gross misconception that the farmers are like directly work under the companies, when in fact it's almost like contracting. So the farmers have to purchase their own supplies, purchase their own coops if they're raising animals, purchase their own resources, and then are like contracted through the company, but it's on you to pay for those things. So if new legislation was to come out to, like, for example, during the whole egg housing era of like legislation, which I believe was like 2015, 2016.
I think so, yeah.
In the state of California, they had changed laws on chicken coop housing, which I'm getting far too into this, my agricultural nerd is showing, which wasn't even beneficial for the chickens. Like, they were projecting it, just it sounded better in theory, but anybody that had any understanding of like, chicken raising, it was bad objectively. But the coops were several $1 million, and the egg industry doesn't have to fucking pay for that. The farmers have to pay for that. And so, farmers essentially were complaining, we have to take out massive loans to pay for these coops. And then as a result, because things are, so subsidized and everything's so cheap, we're not really making a return back on it. It's being funneled to the company. And then a couple years later, like, a new law is passed, so we have to buy new shit, and we can't afford to pay for it. And so that's why standards slack, because quite frankly, impoverished farmers can't afford to keep up with the legislation, which is the responsibility of the company, quite frankly, but the company isn't responsible de facto. It's a contracting business. So they don't present that in the documentary, but that's something that I was very passionate about, because not only are the people who are non-agricultural people surrounded in the area being completely fucked by these pesticides, the waste runoff, the fumes, everything, but the farmers themselves are also being fucked here.
Yeah, and
Nobody wins.
It's just an issue with capitalism.
Yeah.
Like, it's contracting it out, and, like, the companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies not having the responsibility of maintaining the equipment, buying the animals, breeding the animals if they have to. Like, none of the actual work being done is done by the company. They just make the money, which is, like, insane.
Yeah. Which,
none of it is.
you know, and that kind of goes into the political thing, which will go far into later because his portrayal of that as well also blew my mind. Like, a lot of the lobbying for, like, the preventing of further regulations is because if there are more regulations, that requires more supplies to be purchased, which, again, the companies aren't paying for, but they understand that from a business perspective, their egg, dairy, cow, whatever it is, producers will have to buy more things, and as a result, they're going to have to raise the rates on stuff to make up for that, or the farmers are going to go out of business. And it's like, buddy, like, the farmers are already poor and cannot pay for these things. And I know you want these things, but we're not going to pay for them, but it's going to cost a lot of money for us.
Yeah, it would require just a complete overhaul of the way that the agricultural system is set up, which isn't going to happen.
Which is garbage. And there's one lady they talk to, which blows my mind. They interview one fucking person about systematic racism. And
which is supposed to stand in for everybody in the community.
That's all you need. One black woman.
One.
That's it. And she gives a really good interview talking about how she lives near, I believe, is a hog farmer, right?
Yeah, North Carolina.
And he slaughters hogs and leaves them out in the open, which reeks and also is grossly unsafe. And sprays chemicals when she, like, has people over, and they're like, do you think it's deliberate? And she's like, he doesn't spray it any other day of the week. He just sprays it when I have people over. She talks about how most of her family members have either developed cancer or are severely sick, which the prevalence of cancer in that case is pretty indicative that there's something not right in that area.
Sure, of course.
But that's it.
And then they just don't address it. They're like, well, that's proof. And it's like, okay. And
hold on.
Also, I'm sorry, but, like, all of this is not addressing the exact same bullshit that happens with farming literally any vegetable.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of pesticides that go into just farming corn, for instance.
Yeah.
Like, obviously you don't have the same issues as you would with pigs because there's no, like, waste runoff.
But yeah, if, like,
thing.
poorly applied pesticides are a huge issue, that we have, like, mass death of, like, microbial communities in aquatic environments, leading to algal blooms that literally kill millions of, like, aquatic wildlife every year. It's
right, and that
the
fucks
whole
with the
agricultural
environment.
industry is fucked and needs to be overhauled, and we could go very deeply into this. But yeah, it doesn't cover any of it. All of the systemic, like, racism involved in living near an agricultural area, meat or not, is, like, fucked. They spray pesticides where the people spraying the pesticides in developed nations have adequate protection. In a lot of undeveloped nations, there are not regulations on spraying pesticides, so you have people who are mass producing papaya, and we white people fucking love papaya in our smoothies and are spraying pesticides completely unprotected because it's expensive to do so, leading to an increased risk of developing cancer in those areas.
Right, yeah. And, like, never mind the human rights violations that go into farming pretty much anything.
What is it? Driscoll's has been, like, on the fucking wire for decades because they import migrant workers, and then there's, like, a strike, and they're like, woof, it's a good thing these people don't live here, and then they just put them back and then get more, and you're like, you can't, Driscoll's, you can't fucking do that.
Yeah. Except they can.
Because they're Driscoll's. Yeah, fuck Driscoll's, by the way, if you have the alternative to buy literally any other strawberry.
Yeah. It's real bad. But, like, that goes into pretty much any farming, like...
Yeah, U.S. or, you know, externally, like, it's...
Right.
And it's not even an issue that can be solved with, you know, organic farming, because organic farming has its own approved list of pesticides. Like arsenic is approved as an organic pesticide. It's
Woof.
it's not commonly used in the U.S. They have other alternative means, but in other areas, they like if it's from an external community that's like using arsenic, that's fine because it's organic. It's just technically an element. And because of the like inefficiencies of organic farming due to its lack of approved modernization, because it's so heavily restricted in the U.S., if we wanted to convert all U.S. farming to like organic farming, we would have to convert an area of land equivalent to the size of California just to farming and nothing else.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's not solvable with organic farming, and there's runoff from organic farming, and there's a ton of other issues with organic farming. In fact, the only thing that I appreciated about this documentary is they talk about how there is no difference between organic and non-organic milk in terms of nutritional composition.
Yeah.
Because I was going to touch on in dairy farming, they talk about how there's pus in milk, which is objectively incorrect. There's somatic cells, which I think, dependingly, you could think that's kind of gross, but the amount of somatic cells is abysmally small, and if it's above that, that's indicative of an infection, and if they tested that in an entire container of milk, they would dump the entire container of milk.
Right.
Because it's suggesting an infection. If you're giving hormone to cows, the amount that you would be observing in the milk is in the nanograms, like abysmally small. Like it's nearly indetectable in the milk that you're consuming. They talk about like hormones in pigs and hormones in chickens, and at least in the state of California, I'm familiar, we've banned hormones in pigs and poultry for decades. So it's really only in use in cows, and it's going to be so abysmally. There's more hormone, like estrogen-based hormone in cabbage than there is in a pound of, like meat, even if you compare like organic and non-organic. And then I have
didn't
like
know that, but that's super interesting.
Yes, and then I have my whole issues about antibiotic free, because what that means is if your animal gets sick, if you treat it with antibiotics, it's not viable anymore. So that you just don't treat them with antibiotics, which is fucky. Like, I don't know, if my animal is sick, I'd want to treat it, but whatever. I have so many issues with like all of these solutions, and like that's what I'm going off into a bit of a rant, because these are not simple solutions. You can't just go vegan and fix it all, because there's so many other issues with both regular and, both conventional and organic farming. And it's just the whole system is fucked, whether it's in the U.S. or not in the U.S. And you can read articles about hydroponic farms or like small little organic communities. It's not feasible across the U.S. and something.
Right, never mind food deserts where like people just don't have access to that kind of like supply.
Right. And if your proposed option is you need to go vegan, first of all, veganism can be affordable if you're living in an area that's conducive to it. So like when I visited Portland, veganism is relatively affordable, but in LA it's not. I cannot be vegan in LA. It's so fucking expensive. And I don't even like worry about paying rent month to month. If you're a family where you're like stretching the dollars thin and living in a food desert, it's not a solution.
Right, it's just not, you can't do it.
And they don't really touch upon like the socioeconomic issue of the reason why obesity runs deep in poor communities is because they cannot afford good food. They can't.
Right. So they have these 3 people that they bring on that they like are using as proof that veganism works, and like whatever, notwithstanding all of the bullshit about their stories.
Yeah.
But like their claim is we put them on a fully vegan diet and then they, feel 100% better. And it's like, cool. Even if that fucking worked, that's not a viable solution for everybody. The price wall alone is crazy for people in most areas of the U.S. Like,
yeah.
Like it can't be done.
Like and even when I was vegan, I had to take vitamins. Like, and I was eating you know, a wide breadth of food, and my parents were buying me food. But I know plenty of people who are vegan and they're like, yeah, I take vitamins, you know, just in case to like double up on it. People can't afford vitamins in these areas. Like,
It's expensive,
you know, the
yeah.
reason why they're going to, which the whole like era of like anti-fast food in documentaries, like I'm so glad that it's tapering
Supersize
off
Me.
because
Yeah.
they didn't really touch upon the fact of like this mother of 4 with a working husband she never sees only takes her children to get fast food. And I'm like, what do you want her to do?
Can't do anything else. Like, she's also working full time.
They
and,
don't
like,
have a fridge because a lot of the U.S. doesn't have access to refrigeration. Like,
also, I'm sorry, but like a lot of fast food is calorie dense and like
cheap.
You just need that. It's cheap
Yeah.
and it's calorie dense. When you have kids, they're growing, they need the calories. You can't be feeding them like vegetable broth every week because that's all you could afford to buy.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm going to go to the grocery store with $4 in my pocket, I'm not going to buy, you know, meal prep for one night, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to buy a bunch of meals for my children at a fast food restaurant. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It,
So, like, I
and
think
it doesn't for a second touch on that in the documentary. Not at all.
I think it probably doesn't because they know they can't make the argument for it. Like, you can make the argument that a vegan diet is reasonable for some classes of people, which I can meet you eye to eye on. For
Sure,
like,
yes.
if you have a certain amount of income, it is very feasible and can be very affordable relative to your income. But there are plenty of people where it is not, and like to put them in this position where they're poisoning their family and like potentially causing themselves cancer because, well, you're not going out of your way to eat some black beans every week. Like, it's just so supremely shitty. It's just a shitty thing to do.
It's smug. That's
and
it.
so appallingly affluent. It blows my mind.
Yeah, the privilege in this documentary is just insane.
Reeks
like,
of privilege.
It's crazy. And also, like, you've got doctors that just say things like, this thing uses GMOs, so... Or, like, yeah, that was it. They were talking about the cow feed, and they were like, cow feed is mostly GMOs, and then just sort of arch their eyebrows expecting you to make the leap that GMOs are bad, which, newsflash, they're not!
If I may, there
Go for it.
there's a pesticide approved for organic farming called BT, and it stands for a bacteria whose name I literally could not remember for my life. It's like Bacilla thurlingus or something like that. It is an approved organic pesticide that you spray close to the roots because it is a bacteria where if bugs eat it, they are unable to digest it and their stomachs rupture. Now, when you spray it, you have to spray more than you need to because you need to cover it enough where the bugs are going to die. Also, you have the risk of indirect contact where there's a lot of runoff into aquatic ecosystems where if like certain animals can't consume it, then you're like fucking up the ecosystem.
Sure, yeah.
So decades ago, scientists were like, hey, what if instead we developed the plant to produce the same protein that the BT produce, but like in a significantly smaller quantity because then it's targeted and there's no runoff. That sounds excellent. So that's what they did. So it's literally a pesticide that's an organic pesticide in smaller concentrations, which we can't digest it, so it passes through us completely. Like, it's a tiny protein that like doesn't affect us, passes through us, and like really is only going to affect the bugs. And the reason why it's a massive deal, not for us, because you can go to any grocery store near you and see a mountain of tomatoes in the middle of winter, is like, for example, in India, there was a new wave of BT eggplant, which is pretty commonly grown in India. And when they released it there, they were able to significantly reduce the amount of spray pesticides, which I said is a huge fucking deal because there's no protective like equipment available to most people in the developing world to spray these pesticides, which quite frankly they need to spray because if they lose crop, they die. Like they can't just like put white vinegar on it and then hope for the best. Like they need to produce food because they don't have supermarkets. So like there's a clear benefit to the GMOs, and the fact that it is literally using the same organic pesticide that is currently to this day sprayed on organic produce in higher quantities
Yeah.
blows my mind.
Yeah, like that is such a good example of the argument against and for GMOs. Like, people think GMO and they think like an evil scientist like just injecting things into vegetables directly, and it's like, no, that's not how this works. Like,
and like
your dog is a GMO.
Your dog
like,
is all plants, all produce that we have currently is a GMO, and like. I will
in the technical sense, there's only like a list of maybe 12.
Oh yeah, no,
that are
agricultural.
GMOs.
Yeah, agricultural.
Right.
any produce on the market currently has been the result of natural selection over years and years and years. And
right.
years.
Yeah. So,
but like
your bananas are GMOs, but they're not like created in a lab.
No,
you know?
they've been
they don't have to
selectively like chosen over millennia. And, like, there is absolutely stuff I can concede about the Monsanto company that is kind of seedy. I could do a whole episode on this because, like, it's very in-depth. It requires an understanding of agricultural law. But, like, that also relates back to the issue of systemic racism in, like, you know, the agricultural industry is kind of exploiting the fact that developing nations do need this technology deeply to solve world hunger. And, like, it's like the pharmaceutical industry. If a group of people absolutely needs a medication to live, there are plenty of, you know, like, pharmaceutical companies that are going to hike it through the roof so that they can turn a profit. Insulin, like, as an example, right?
Right, yeah.
There's an example of evil everywhere, but, like, I fucking hate these doctors that are just, like, have gone left and right to demonize literally every part of the agricultural industry without talking about the massive effects of produce production. Like,
yeah, that I think is such a good way to segue into like my big thing, my sort of final
political one. Oh man, you can have the wheel on this one. This one's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, and like, okay, so first of all, I just want to start by saying that there's a lot of stuff, well, we've already kind of covered this, but there's a lot of stuff that he like touches on briefly that they're valid points.
Yeah.
Like, some of the stuff he says about agriculture is valid. Yeah, it's fucked. Innocent people everywhere are getting screwed over by the agricultural industry because there isn't really a good solution, and also our lawmaking is ineffective at best. However, he makes these points and then coats them in stupidity, so no one can really... You can't really see the forest for the trees. And also there's so much information that is doubly true. So then he moves into, like, the idea that, like, lobbying and government funding and, like, the American Cancer Society and the Susan B. Komen, what is that, foundation.
Which has her own fucking issues, but...
Right, we can get into that. But Jesus Christ. But, like, all of these government-funded institutes for, you know, human health are morally corrupt because they accept money from fast food industries and pharmaceutical companies, etc., etc. And he does this with just the most beautiful turn of phrase. He says, "Then it all came together," which is just...
Cue to me slamming my head against my headboard.
Right? I, like, audibly groan. Like, it's
What's
just
all
so
coming together for you,
bad.
buddy?
Yeah, come on, let's hear it, pal.
Let's go.
And he uses this graphic to list all of, like, the different fast food companies that give money to the American Cancer Society or all of the different pharmaceutical companies. It's like, we know. Oh my God. And it's like, it's played to be like this huge moment with all this dramatic music and, oh my God, Chick-fil-A gives money to the American Cancer Society. And it's like, yeah, I know that fucking Johnson & Johnson is in my congressman's pocket. I know.
I know my congressman is actively sucking off the McDonald's Corporation. Like, what do you want?
My senator fucks a McDouble every day. What am I gonna do about it? It's like,
fucking Arby's is cupping the balls of the American Heart Association. What do you want?
The president's nutsack is filled with Coca-Cola. Fuck.
Sobbing. Oh my god.
And it's like, and I don't mean to be glib, but it's just, yeah. You've made a point. We live in a society. I get it. But also, this is not news. Like, I don't understand this attitude that, like, he really did think that he uncovered a massive global conspiracy because KFC donates to, like, the World Health Organization. That's not correct, but whatever. It's just, I know that the WHO doesn't take kickbacks from KFC. But, like,
oh my god.
You know what I'm saying? But it's just not, it's not news. And, like, he plays it up to be this big deal that, like, well, they're taking money from Dannon, so they must be,
The yogurt
paid off.
industry is systematically trying to kill us.
Right? And it's like, no, I mean, they want money, and that's kind of it. Like, these people, these corporations, and we talked about this in Matt's episode about lobbyists, is like, they just want more money. And we know this. And, like,
Is this, hey, what's his
veganism
name?
is not going to change that.
What's his
Like,
name?
Who?
Our man?
Or Kip?
Kip. Sit down for a minute. I need to ask you a question. How do I put this? Are you surprised? And if you are, I am concerned.
And it genuinely seems like he was shocked to find out that, like, fast food companies provide kickbacks to nonprofits. And, like, and so here's the thing. And they do touch on this, is that, like, these organizations need money to run, right? They're nonprofits. Private donations by, like, me. So when I donate $5 to St. Jude, like, that's not keeping them afloat. It helps, I guess, but, like, I'm not the one keeping that hospital open.
What? I
know.
I donated,
Still, you're beating hard.
I put 23 cents into a donation container
But
the
I
other
rounded
day.
up my Panda Express order. And so, like, yeah, they need the money to run, and so they accept private donations from corporations, and yeah, that inherently leads to corruption. It just do. But, like, the thing that they were sort of piggybacking this on is, like, well, I have all this evidence that says that meat causes cancer, and it's like, no, you don't. No
Kip?
one does.
Hey, Kip.
Hey, Kip.
I'm going to turn my chair around. I'm going to sit, like a stepfather here. Hey,
Yeah.
Kip.
Sit on my lap.
Kip, this is nothing.
This is nothing. And, like, and so we could go into, what studies are being funded by who.
I could actually, if anybody is interested, again, I was in the agriculture and pharma industry for a very long time and have very in-depth knowledge of how this whole schema works. Yeah, there is so many studies that are fucky, and this is like my massive fucking issue is so, okay. So I'll give an example that I think is fairly representative of this entire corruption process. Yeah. There is a very, very, very famous study in the agricultural field, and it's called, God, it's escaping my mind, but it's a rat study on glyphosate, the glyphosate rat study, and I can't remember the last name of this man who is my nemesis, but essentially, if you look critically at the data, it shows that there is a slight increased risk of these rats developing tumors when consuming glyphosate. Okay. That's concerning. However, if you look carefully, one, the sample size was small. If I recall correctly, there's a total of like 3 to 4 cohorts of rats per experimental control. They're also feeding the rats corn, which in many cases can induce cancer in certain species of rats if it's not properly cleaned, because there is a bacteria on corn that could cause cancer in rats.
Yeah, I had rats.
Yeah.
And I was advised not to give them fresh corn.
Yeah, you cannot do that. And they were creating their own cornmeal from GMO corn, which you can't do. If you're giving rats corn like food, it's probably being processed in a facility where they're heavily controlling that. They don't talk about that. The specific species of rat that they use is called the Sprague-Brawley rat. And the Sprague-Brawley rat has an incidence of developing tumors where I think past a year, the incidence is about 60%. And I think the age of the rats, if you do the math, there was a 70 to 90% chance that these rats were going to develop tumors. So,
yeah, I mean, also rats are pretty
tumory
in general. Yeah, they're predisposed to tumors.
Yeah, these are
most of the
specifically
time.
rats that are designed to develop tumors quicker for tumor studies, which is like if you're like, we need the tumor tissue to look at the effects of X on it, that's fine.
Right.
But to say like this rat we're using to prove that X causes cancer is just not, you can't do that. You cannot use this rat for that study.
Yeah. Also, I just want to like point out that rat physiology and human physiology
so
is
wildly
pretty different. Yeah, it's pretty different.
And so they didn't disclose any conflict of interest. However, if you look into this researcher, he is definitely well connected with like an anti-Monsanto, anti-GMO board of scientists, and it was published and very quickly redacted with a lot of corrections from the paper that published it. If you watch John Oliver's like Sketchment like thing on publications, like it's depending on the publication, you can pick a shitty publication and get published anywhere you want.
Sure, yeah.
But it was redacted because it was a shitty study. And, like, it's kind of on the opposite end of the, like, I guess, like, the funding train of they're talking about all of these companies that are putting a vested interest in proving to you that meat is safe when it's not, when there's, like, a fuckload of money from the organic industry also going into trying to show you that their products are better. At the end of the day, somebody's trying to sell you something. Like,
yeah, of course.
Like,
yeah.
And science is currently notoriously bad at regulating it if you don't know what you're reading, which is why it's so dangerous, because I can read through something like that and be like, yeah, this is trash. This isn't publishable. This is garbage. But if you don't know what you're reading, I don't blame you for reading that and being like, holy shit, that's wild.
Right. It's like when the WHO published that meat is a class 1 carcinogen that raises your risk of getting cancer by like 18%, which by the way is already like pretty negligible, but it's even more negligible when you think about the fact that what they're measuring is your average chance of getting colorectal cancer is 5% baseline. That's the best number that we have right now.
Yeah.
An 18% raise from 5% is 6%.
Also, I should also mention that class 1 list also includes ethanol in alcoholic beverages, because alcohol is a class 1 carcinogen, as well as UV radiation, which is also a class 1.
When you walk outside,
right? Like, it's a relative thing. Yes, plutonium is on the list, but it's also being near plutonium is gonna fucking decimate you.
Yeah, you'll die. You'll just die.
Versus, like, you could probably look like a baked potato for years before you really feel the effects of those UV rays hitting you.
Right. And also there's the genetic element, which we really don't have time to get into because it's so complicated.
Oh my god. He also said in the documentary that there is actually way less like influence of genetics on health conditions, which is so dishonest.
I once when I went to Saddleback Church, they had this thing called the Daniel Plan, which I will go so far as to say that if you follow the actual diet that they lay out for you accurately, it's probably good for you.
Okay.
But, like, also, diet isn't a one-size-fits-all, so whatever. And the idea is that, like, you eat a mostly plant-based diet. If you eat meat, then it's organic, which whatever. And then, you only eat bread if it's, like, Ezekiel bread, because that's... And the whole idea is that you only eat 8 things that people in the Bible ate.
Oh my god, I cannot think of a worse fate on this earth.
Right? I would rather be dead, and I quickly learned that when I was 12 and was put on this diet. I swear to God, we had a moment, like, right after we got home from church, and we literally cleaned out everything in our house that didn't follow this plan. And, like...
So what, you had a loaf of Ezekiel bread and, like...
Yup.
Some water that Jesus may turn into wine if he swings
Someday.
by?
Yeah. We're waiting on that still.
That's it.
But,
That's the only thing in your cabinet. Well, we have
that's
some
it.
Ezekiel bread.
And, like, that's it. Yeah. It was fantastic. But the claims that they made during the seminar in which they presented this to us, which, by the way, was an 8-hour-long seminar that I did, in fact, sit through.
At the age of 12.
I was 12. I might have been a little older than that, but I was not old enough to...
Appreciate an 8-hour presentation.
You know what? I don't think I could do that now, so whatever. But they were making these claims that, like, if you ate this diet, that you could reverse Alzheimer's. And I was like, even at the time, I was like, that doesn't sound right.
Hi, we're
But
Cutting
now
Class
I am
Podcast.
22,
Are you interested in
and
skinny
y'all,
dipping with Mao
that
Zedong?
doesn't sound
How about
right.
listening to
That's
sexy
not
and
correct.
suicidal subliminal
That's
messages?
not correct.
Maybe
doing
destroying an
just
entire city with
homeopathic
flaming
things
birds.
and, like,
Or how about having a bowl of
naturopathic things at
anti-pornography
home is not
cereal?
gonna cure your
We're two
cancer.
high school history
I'm
teachers that
sorry,
like to
but
cover
it's
the
not.
lesser-known
Steve Jobs
stories
died
of
from
American
doing
and world
that.
history.
Steve
You can check us out on
Jobs
iTunes
was
or
one of the
anywhere else that
richest
you get your
men on the
podcasts
face
or
of the fucking
cuttingclasspodcast.com.
planet and could have reversed any cancer that came his way within reason. And he decided to do the naturopathic route and died. It's
he
like
died, and so many other people die. And I'm not saying that, like, a healthy diet won't help you feel better in life or whatever. And, like, a healthy diet certainly will help you more than eating like shit if you have cancer. However, to say that one specific diet, i.e. the vegan diet, is the one-size-fits-all for everybody, including children, which they do in fact imply, which is just not true.
Oh, it's so fucking
It is so
corrupt.
reductive. And they have this interview, and this is where I'm going to end it because it was so frustrating to watch. They interviewed a man named Dr. Ratner, and they start the documentary with this interview, just a clip of it, and then they end the documentary with the same interview, and they show the whole thing. And Kip decides that he's going to ask this man whether veganism or a plant-based diet is healthier than a diet with meat. And this doctor is from, like, the American Heart Association, I believe.
Oh, yes.
And
I know where we're at.
Yeah. And he just kind of shuts down because he's like, okay, so clearly this is why you're here. Like, you're here so that I can, like, falter at your question and, like, you know, and he doesn't say any of this, but it's very much that energy of like, I see. You have an agenda. This meeting is over.
Yeah.
Right? And so he stands up and he's like, I'm not the one you should be talking to, because quite frankly, like there is no one size fits all for diet. And he's like, I don't understand why this has to be an argument. And he's like, well, like, you're arguing with me about whether or not veganism is the healthiest diet. And I'm telling you that I can't dictate to you what a healthy diet is. I can tell you what an unhealthy diet is.
Yeah.
But, like...
Which is fair.
Right, that's fair. And, like, I think this moment was so telling for the documentary. And I think he wanted it to be, like, this gotcha moment of, like, the doctor won't talk about diet and won't tell me what healthy things are because
so
he knows.
Fucking rude. He was
It
was
rude.
This Michael Moore energy of like playing dumb and being like, he was like, what would you say the connection is between eating meat and cancer? And he's like, I'm not going to speak on that. And he's like, well, because I read a paper that said that it reduces cancer. And he's like, yeah, if this is what it is, this conversation's over. And he's like, it showed they actually and it's like, no, dude, he said the conversation is over. Like he kept reiterating it. And then he was like, well, I'm just trying to ask some questions. And it's like, you are not listening to him.
You have an agenda. And he did, in fact, answer the question. Finally, he was like, look, most studies can't be accurate to diet and, like, for the human body. Like, you can't force a group of people into a room and then dictate what they eat, right? Like, you can't just do that for a long period of time. And what he says is, like, most of the studies that come out about diet are either not accurate or are just done poorly and are wrong. So, like, you can get published if you do just about anything. So if you're sitting here with one single file in front of you and saying, well, these people found that meat causes cancer, without the literature in front of me, I'm not going to be able to, like, answer your questions, but also, like, I know how accurate these studies tend to be. And also, it's impossible to do an actual, like, accurate study on the long-term effects of diet.
Yeah.
And he just wouldn't have it.
Yeah, which is like the fairest answer in the world. I was like, that's it.
You're right.
And
this guy is visibly upset. Like, the doctor is upset that this is how the conversation is going because and I can't imagine how frustrating it must be to have this, like, fucking cherry picker over here, like, needling at you.
Yeah, like, oh, sir, I understand that you've gone through your undergraduate career and also several years of medical school, as well as probably going into practice and practicing being a doctor for probably decades, and then being appointed to be a representative in the American Heart Association, and clearly by your age have spent a large majority of your life doing this one thing. But excuse me, sir, I've read one article. And you're like,
right, yeah.
Oh, no, that's not how this conversation's gonna go, sir. Like,
yeah, no.
And like,
he wants you to come out on his side, and at the end of it, you're just like, wow, Kip's a prick. Like,
he looks bad. He looks shitty.
He looks shitty.
And that is like a really good point to end on, because the doctor, I think, said what all of the companies don't really want to say, because it's hard to explain that to, like, people outside that field. Is like, quite frankly, there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all diet. Everybody's different. No. It's nearly impossible to do nutrition studies like that because everybody's going to react differently. Everybody has different genetics. Some people are going to be dishonest, which means you need a really, really large cohort. And as you continue to do a study, more and more people drop out, like, the longer and longer it goes.
Right, and an ideal study for something like this would be to take a bunch of children, like 200 children, split them in half, put one of them on nothing but a fast food diet and one of them on nothing but an organic, all plant-based diet, and then see what happens when they're 80. And that will never happen.
That will never happen. And it's like, that's the other thing, is there's no control because there's no quote-unquote controlled diet.
Right.
You know, like, nah.
It can't be done.
Right? And my huge issue with a lot of nutrition studies that, like, most nutritional professionals will concede, is there is a huge correlation between socioeconomic status and health. We've talked about this, right? So if you have people that are like, well, I'm vegan and it's improved my health. And I'm like, you know what, Deborah? You also live in the hills of Laguna, where there's almost no pollution whatsoever. You never have to drive a car. Your days consist of going to yoga, taking vitamins, and walking your dog. Like, yes, you're probably going to be in better shape than the 13-year-old assembling your iPhone in a polluted city that cannot afford food. Like,
yeah, fucking US Open surfer over here that they interviewed going, you know, like, I surf and I am on a fully vegan diet and I feel better than I ever have. And every day I feel a little bit better. And I'm just saying, like, if there's a will, there's a way. And if you really want it, you'll just do it. Like, it's like, fuck you, Sabrina. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
They've shown that test scores are decreased in areas with higher pollution because the pollutants in the air damage the growth and development of the children growing in that area, right? Like, inherently, if you are living in an affluent area and can afford this diet, it has been proven that you are probably able to afford and have the time to exercise, to pay for vitamins, to go to doctors. Like, your health is going to be better than somebody who's working 60 hours a week and is, like, lucky to get 2 meals a day. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Exactly.
You can't do these studies. And even if everybody was living on the same playing field, which they never will, you still can't do it because everybody's got different genetics. Like,
exactly.
What is it? I was going to talk a smidge about it. Like, Cassie Ho is a beauty blogger, or she's a fitness guru, and she's gotten a huge amount of flack going against her lately because she said, like, hey, I want to go on a diet and I'm going to eat right for me. And I know for me, I don't react well to carbs. So it's probably going to be like keto-ish, but not full keto because that's not healthy. But like that, I'm just going to eat right for my body. That's going to work well for her maybe. And she knows her body. Whereas I know personally that does not work for me. I need a ton of carbs. I can't eat a high fat diet. Like, it's not comparable at all. Not in the slightest.
Yeah, bodies are different, straight up. And also, like, I don't know, speaking personally, and this is all a little bit of a bias because I am just talking about myself. But like,
how fucking dare you on your own podcast?
What? The audacity.
Yeah.
No, and like this is something that I've heard echoed by women everywhere, and I'm sure there is to a certain degree this is shared by men. But like, I know that in the last 4 years since I started college, I've gained 35 to 40 pounds depending on the time of fucking day. But like,
that's adulthood.
And like, whatever, I don't expect to be the same weight I was in high school, but I am at the point where like I should probably fucking figure out a workout routine. When I was in college, that wasn't goddamn possible because I was working part-time, nearly full-time, and I was going to school full-time. It just couldn't be done.
Yeah.
So, I was going to work after a full day at school, and I was getting the $2, whatever, the 99-cent soft tacos at Del Taco, and that was my dinner.
Yeah.
Like, that was my life. But now that I am, where I'm at as far as my weight, I am way disinclined to go to the doctor because I know how how people who have gained weight are treated, I don't want to be another one of the women who steps into a doctor's office and goes, oh, I'm having back pain, and then I'm told, why don't you lose 30 pounds? Like,
excellent,
that's, first
doctor.
Of all,
Thank you.
Thank you. And my advice, obviously, is find another doctor, but it's demoralizing. It's dehumanizing. It feels awful to be reduced to your weight in that moment. And, like, yeah, I can imagine that once you're, in your 40s and you've been working full-time all the time, you're living in a generally impoverished area, even if you have the money or the insurance to go to a doctor, you're not going to fucking want to because of just the stigma and the judgment that's associated with it.
Yeah.
It's just this crazy cyclical thing.
This is such a classist documentary is what it all...
Oh my God,
God,
yes.
It's like a documentary on how to develop orthorexia and how to be talked down to, and like... This is the problem I have with, like, these types of vegans, and why I was so hesitant when I was vegan to say that I was vegan, because I'm like, man, I don't want to be involved with these fuckers. Like,
exactly. Oh my God.
Like, just so
There's a reason why there are jokes.
Right?
Yeah,
I can't imagine looking at someone in the eyes and saying, like, you're harming your family by feeding them meat to somebody who's fucking doing their best. Like, I can't imagine having someone come into your office and just shaming them for eating the way that they do, even if it might not be healthy. Like, I don't know. It's not hard to be nice, Yeah,
it's also none of your fucking business. Like, don't try and fool anybody into saying that this is about concern for your fellow man when it's just about making yourself feel superior. Like, at no point have I ever asked no one has asked a thin person.
Yeah.
Are you sure you're eating right? Like, that's never happened.
No.
And, like, the second someone turns around and sees someone who's vaguely overweight, they think it's their job to play doctor. And it's like, no, you're not doing this for me. You're doing this to feel better than everyone. And,
like, the reason I'm bringing this up, at least, like, in respect to this documentary, because this documentary is clearly targeted towards people with heart problems or diabetes.
Right, yeah.
You should feel shitty because you're eating meat, which, quite frankly, if you have any, like, diet-related disease, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, whatever it is, like, whatever, quote-unquote, diet-related disease it is, you probably should be going to a doctor before you listen to a documentary produced by Joaquin Phoenix. That's just personally my call.
I'm sorry. We need to pause the podcast. I need you to pronounce his name one more time.
It's Joaquin. I know. I panicked.
Oh my God.
It's Joaquin. Okay. You know what? Fuck you. But like, this cheap documentary preys on that exact feeling that you talked about of where, like, I don't want to go to a doctor because I don't want to feel shitty, which is fair. And then, like, they're like, don't worry, you don't have to go to a doctor. You just have to do something that might be dangerous for your condition and also feel shitty about it the whole fucking time.
Yeah, just stop taking your meds and only eat vegetables.
Perfect. Don't do that. Please don't do
insane.
that. Please don't fucking do that.
Don't do that. I'm not saying you should. Don't do
God,
that.
please don't do
take
that.
that advice.
Oh, I hate documentary. I hate it.
It's the worst. It's
this
just so
episode
awful.
has been about as long as the documentary.
Oh, it's longer.
Yeah.
The documentary is only like an hour and 15 minutes.
No, it's 97 minutes.
Is it really?
It's 97 minutes.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so I'm feeling like we covered more in quality in our time here than in that documentary. And if
it's even fucking followable, I don't even.
I hope to God I'll be editing it. I'll let you know. I also want to say that my favorite quote from this documentary, and something I will be using henceforth.
Oh boy, yes.
And one expert said that the amount of people that die from salmonella every year is more than the number of people that died in 9/11. Continues to say the amount of people, and I couldn't catch it because I was actually laughing so hard I knocked the wind out of myself. I think it was it was something. He said...
Oh, no, it was... The next one was... I wrote it down because I thought it was so ridiculous. He said that the amount of deaths from antibiotic resistance
is more than 7 9/11s, were his exact fucking words. And I texted Brooke and I said, damn, Americans will literally use anything to measure something before they use the metric system. And I
don't understand America's tendency to use 9/11 as a measurement for death. Like, I don't know. Like, first of all, let's not take a national tragedy and then turn it into a metric. But also, that's so specific.
And his argument was like, if there were 7 9/11s every year, we would probably pay attention to it. I'm like, are you...
Find the bastards, was what he said. And I'm like...
Are you
what?
telling me that we're not paying attention to the superbugs right now? I'm sorry.
Yeah, come on.
There are so many things that I have been told about today to worry about. I'm sorry. If all of my anxieties cannot be directly related to 7 9/11s of death. I'm tired. Everything is concerning. I'm trying my best.
Yeah, come on, man. The Amazon's still on fire.
Here you are in a Tom Ford shirt telling me to be worried about how many people from 9/11 died relative to antibiotic resistance. I'm losing my mind.
Which also, fucking antibiotic resistance isn't only caused by eating meat. What? 20,000 deaths a year in the United States due to antibiotic resistance. Most of that is most likely not due to eating meat. Like, come on.
It's not taking your antibiotics properly.
Correctly, exactly. Exactly.
7 whole 9/11s.
I hate this documentary. I hate it so much.
Anyway,
I wish it would die in a fire.
I knew that this documentary would take the life out of me. It actually gave me a migraine, and now I have a new metric to measure things, which is number of 9/11s. Like, henceforth, so several million people died. Excuse me, I'm American. How many 9/11s is that?
Can you measure that in 9/11s? I'm sorry. I can only measure things in how many 9/11s. Is that like 0.023 9/11s?
Like, okay, thank you. That's like when you have to ask people to change things from Celsius to Fahrenheit, but now it's like, how many 9/11s is that? Blows my mind that somebody said that.
How many degrees 9/11? Jesus fucking Christ.
I hate us. I hate Americans so fucking much. Anyway.
We should just take America and push it somewhere else.
If we're pushing it at someone else, can you please quantify the distance in
9/11?
In number of 9/11s,
all right, everybody, that's our show.
Thank you for joining us. I hope that we enjoyed some of my rants on the agricultural industry and Brooke losing her mind about all of it.
Just all of it, yeah.
All of it.
I don't know. I actually entered a fugue state. I don't remember most of this. Cool.
Almost everything that you heard in this documentary you can discount unless you heard it from somewhere else. It's not worth the time to try to pick the good things. Read that Vox article. I'm going to be tweeting out some memes from this. I think I'm not going to do the 9/11 one because it's so specific and niche and not in context. I feel like it'd come off as insensitive.
Also, 9/11 like just happened. Right. Like the anniversary. I don't mean like it just happened in Never mind.
We'll be sensitive. Anyway,
18 years
we
ago.
have social media.
I sure do.
We have an Instagram and a Twitter that can be found at TTKMeUp. We have a Facebook, but who cares? We have an email, ttkmeup@gmail.com, where we accept submissions for campfire horror stories, which is where we share horror stories on our show with a little ambiance in the background. We're collecting them. We'll talk about them when we get the chance. I should be getting my deposit soon because I've complained to my leasing company about not receiving my deposit in the appointed 21 days as mandated by California law, but it's fine.
It's fine. I'm sure it's fine.
Once I get that safety deposit, though, I am going to lose my fucking mind.
It's going to be an event.
Mini-sode.
I'm going to set up a countdown timer to the day that we do our fucking leasing company mini-sode. It's gonna be wild. I can't wait to tell my asbestos story.
Oh, soon. You have to wait for me, baby. Soon. And I also want my money because I don't know how I'm gonna pay my fucking rent, and I need my deposit back. Anyway.
It's fine. You could always give us money on Patreon. That'll help Olivia pay.
Yeah, that would help me pay my rent. If you go to our Patreon, which is linked at our website, ttkmeup.com, we also have merch such as stickers and posters and baby onesies, which is my favorite. We need to update that because it says you still go to UCI.
Does it? Oh, yeah. I graduated, bitch. I escaped.
Yeah. Thank Christ. I think that's all of our announcements.
Yeah, that's it. Next week, we're going to be having a guest. Olivia has a nutritional student friend. I botched that. Oof, whatever. God, you take it from here.
She won't hear it before we record. She's very behind on the podcast. So
fucking means she doesn't support our goddamn podcast.
You have plenty of time, Brooke, is what I'm saying. But yeah, she'll be coming up, and she's a kinesiology major, and we're going to be talking about all of this bullshit. She also grew up in South County, just as we did, in the lovely, affluent areas that, God, have the weirdest eating trends in the world.
Sure do.
I will never get over the day I walked in on a friend of ours, and her mother was drinking activated charcoal.
God damn it. Could do a whole thing on fucking activated charcoal.
I hate activated charcoal. And we have figured out our next series, and it is Snake Oil Salesman, which I've been excited for so fucking long.
Now, to clarify, are we doing, like, the snake oil itself or the sales people behind it?
Focus on the person. I feel like we need to, like, put some targets on people in a legally responsible way. And I think I will pick somebody that doesn't already have a documentary made about them.
Interesting. Okay.
But we'll see. I have some ideas.
Yeah.
I have some ideas. You can't choose Bezos.
God fucking damn it.
You're like, I wasn't gonna choose Bezos.
Well, now I want to. No, yeah. You know, he's not selling snake oil, but I still hate him.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk!
I hate Elon Musk.
He's just insufferable. Anyway, that's our show.
We love you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being a friend. Oh no. We did different things.
Oh. Also, our podcast keeps getting flagged on YouTube, so maybe I'll just sing us out. Da 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 da. Bye, it's been real.
God damn.
Jesus.
Hey, Lindsay, are you ever curious about those old books with weird covers in the bargain bins?
Oh my god, yes. Hey, Daniel, would you be in a book club where no one reads the whole book?
Funny you ask, 'cause that's our show, 33% Pulp. You, I, and a guest host each read a different third of a pulp novel and then recap the whole thing together.
We start with context, the author, genre, themes, and so on. By the end of the third episode, you'll have heard the main plot, our commentary, and confusion.
And sometimes we have companion episodes with related content from beyond the book with other podcasts. We're 33% Pulp and 100% hopeful you'll join us. Bye.